Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In today's video, I'm going to be previewing the upcoming season for the Dallas Mavericks. However, before I get too far into it, I want to remind you all to leave a like and subscribe. I've been appreciating all the support that I've been receiving lately, and I hope to see that continue. Now, without further ado, let's talk about the Mavs. Before we can adequately preview the upcoming season, though, I feel that it is necessary to reflect upon the recently concluded offseason and all of the transactions that the Mavericks made during that period. First, they drafted Josh Green with the 18th pick. This is a pick that I disagreed with at the time, but after thinking about it a bit more and listening to some other people's opinions, it makes sense to me because he's really the type of player you want to pair up Luka Doncic alongside. They took Tyrell Terry with the 31st pick. This is a pick that I really was a fan of. I thought that Terry was probably a top 25-ish guy in the draft. He was one of the, if not the highest guy remaining on my board when the Mavericks selected at 31, and I think that this is a nice pick for them. And they also took Tyler Bey with the 36th pick. I was not a big fan of this one because I don't think that Bey has an insanely high feel for the game, and I don't necessarily see what his role offensively is going to be. I don't think that he can do a whole lot on that end of the floor, which is pretty important, but I do understand the Mavs' rationale in making this selection because Bey, similar to Josh Green, is a really nice player to pair up with Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis if he can figure out how to play the game at a high level because he already has great athletic tools. Not my favorite pick in the draft, but certainly something I can understand. Then they traded, I guess that this happened before the Tyler Bey selection, but they swapped Seth Curry for Josh Richardson in the 36th pick. Another really, really nice move as they were able to bring in the better player of the two as well as some draft compensation. Now, Curry is on a long-term deal, which makes him probably a bit more valuable in a trade package than Josh Richardson is. But Richardson also fits the Mavs' plans for the future better than Curry does, since Curry's on a long-term deal and Richardson is on an expiring deal. So following the season, if the Mavs want to create cap space, they could decline Richardson's cap hold and look to bring in a max free agent. I know they have their eyes on Giannis Antetokounmpo and Kawhi Leonard, certainly. So I thought that was a really nice move. Once again, he's a perfect fit with Luka Doncic, something I'll get into a bit more later. But solid trade for the Mavs. They also, in free agency, re-signed Trey Burke to a 3-year, $10 million deal, which is a move that I quite liked. I'm a fan of Trey Burke. I think that he's a quality bench player in the NBA. It's a cheap deal, and it keeps him around under team control for multiple seasons, so I liked this deal for the Mavs. They also signed Willie Cauley-Stein to a 2-year, $8 million deal with a team option on the second year. Obviously, that second-year team option is important to creating as much cap space as possible next offseason. But Cauley-Stein is a fairly cheap center who is going to come off the bench and give them like 10 to 15 minutes per night. Nothing too special, but they also didn't overpay for a backup center, which many other teams across the league did. So you can't hate them too much for that. And my favorite of their free agent signings was getting Westside Woundu. Woundu, I think that's correct, on a 2-year minimum contract. Move that I liked quite a bit because I am genuinely a pretty big believer in Woundu, and I think that he is going to become a pretty solid rotation piece in the NBA, but we'll talk about him a bit more later. Now that we have gone through all of the transactions the Mavs made during the offseason, I think that we're ready to preview the upcoming season for the team. In this exercise, I like to go through every player and give my expectations and thoughts on them as an individual, and then accumulate all of those player opinions and come up with some predictions for what the team is capable of. When I do this, I always start with the point guard position, and the Mavs have quite a few guys that you could consider a point guard, but obviously the first one you have to talk about here is Luka Doncic. Doncic is one of the best offensive players in the entire NBA. He's an absolute genius in the pick and roll, always seems to make the right read on what he should do, and he's pretty much capable of doing whatever it is that he thinks he should do. He can pull up and shoot it from distance. He has a nice mid-range shot. He has a super good floater that he converts at a high level. He's a great passer. He's very capable of kicking to the same side corner, finding the roll man, or even making the incredibly difficult pass to the opposite corner. We saw him do that last night with a play where he found Josh Richardson in the opposite corner, made a nice over-the-head pass. But obviously, Luka's just terrific in pick and roll. He's also a great isolation scorer. He might not be the quickest player in the NBA, but he's able to use finesse and dribble moves in order to create space for himself, and he is quicker than people give him credit for. Obviously, Luka Doncic is a terrific offensive player, and on defense, I think that he is also okay, just because the Mavericks are able to put him on whoever the weakest offensive player is on the other team. Now, usually you would say, well, they could even take advantage of that. Well, Luka is a very smart player. He has a great basketball intelligence level, and he also is a pretty well-sized guy. He's 6'7", 220-ish pounds, I believe. So that makes him capable of guarding pretty much like 1 through 4 if he really needs to, and he's never taking on difficult matchups at those positions. So even though he is not great defensively, he's certainly not a liability. With that in combination with his offensive skills, you have a clear top 10 player, and as he continues to mature, someone that really has a chance to become the best player in the entire game at some point in his career. Next point guard to talk about here is Jalen Brunson. Brunson is a player that I seem to be much higher on than others, simply because I value his basketball intelligence at an incredibly high level. He just is such a cerebral player, tends to make the right play in the half-court setting most of the time, similar to his starter at his position, Luka. He's a really good pick-and-roll player due to this ability, makes a lot of the right reads, similar to Luka once again in that situation, and he's also a really high-quality pull-up three-point shooter. Shot at 35% from the three-point line for his career, which certainly is not blowing anybody away, but because of the degree of difficulty on those three-point shots, I think that Jalen Brunson's a pretty good floor spacer, and on catch-and-shoot opportunities, he's really a high-level shooter, and he converts those at a high rate, which is terrific for this team, considering that Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis are two players that can really create those open looks at a higher rate than most. On the defensive end, Brunson isn't terrific, but because he's not a very athletic player, that also limits how effective he can really be on offense. He can't really score in isolations because he doesn't have the necessary burst to get around his defender. But on defense, he's able to make up for it with his smart decision-making, good rotational stuff. He's not great on the ball, but he's a good team defender. And the combination of all these skills, in my opinion, make Jalen Brunson someone who could be a starting point guard in the NBA. And on this team, he's just a really high-quality backup. I love Jalen Brunson as a role player, and I think that he is a nice piece for this Mavericks team moving forward. Certainly someone that could be the sixth man on a really, really good team. Next guy here is Trey Burke. Now, Trey Burke and Tyrell Terry, each of the next two guys I'm going to talk about here, could be considered point guards or like wings, but not really wings since they're really small, so they're more of like combo guard types, but I am categorizing them here as point guards because I certainly think they're more likely to play the 1 than they are the 3. But Burke is a player that I like quite a bit. I think that it was a nice move by the Mavericks to keep him around on a cheap deal. He's an excellent shot creator, has a really nice ability to utilize his athleticism to beat defenders off the dribble. He's not a terrific passer, and sometimes he over-dribbles, and you see entire possessions where it's just Trey Burke dribbling around the perimeter, which is certainly not what you want. He also tends to take too many mid-range jumpers, which can be pretty painful to watch at times. But in general, his ability to be a plus 3-point shooter, he shot 42% from distance last year, as well as a good shot creator, and he's also a decent defensive player, despite the fact that he's very small. He's not good, but he's not a liability either. With all those things combined, Trey Burke is a nice player who can come off the bench and get you a bucket. Tyrell Terry is the last guy here, and I love this pick for the Mavericks. I think that Tyrell Terry is perhaps the optimal player to pair alongside Luka Doncic in the backcourt in the long run. He is someone that can handle playmaking duties, but doesn't necessarily need to. Because of his shooting ability, he can play off the ball and space the floor for a guy like Luka. He's going to knock down all of the open looks that Luka can create for him. He also is a very smart passer. He's able to play in the pick and roll at a high level for that reason. Does a nice job of making the right read out of the pick and roll. And on defense, well, he's certainly not a plus defender since he's a fairly small guy, not a terrific on-ball defender, and can be really taken advantage of in mismatches. But he's a smart guy who plays good team defense and is certainly capable of taking on matchups that aren't mismatches, but in general, he needs to get stronger in order for his defense to really reach the point that it needs to for him to be a starter in the NBA. I've heard that he's a very hard worker, a very high-character kid, and for those reasons, I'm probably willing to bet on Tyrell Terry, and I certainly think that he could be a starter for this Mavs team long-term. Probably my favorite of their 3 draft picks. Now that we've covered the point guard position, we're ready to move on to the wing, where we will start with the newly acquired Josh Richardson. Now, I said that Terry could be the optimal pairing with Luka in the backcourt because of his shooting and ability to play off the ball. But there's an alternative. You could either have the plus shooter or you could have the plus defender. And that's what Josh Richardson is. He's also a mediocre league average-ish shooter. Past 2 seasons, he shot at 36% in 2018-19 and then 34% in 2019-20. So I genuinely buy him as a decent 3-point shooter who isn't necessarily going to be an elite floor spacer but can knock it down at a decent rate. He also probably will have a spike in his 3-point shooting efficiency now that he's playing alongside one of the greatest shot creators in the league in Luka Doncic. So that's certainly something that you could watch out for, but really the reason why the Mavs brought on Josh Richardson is because of his defense. He's going to really help Luka out on that end of the floor by being able to take on the more difficult matchups night in and night out, whether it's at the point guard or the 2 guard or forward position. He can guard multiple positions, and I genuinely trust him guarding some of the better players in the league. Last season in the playoffs during the Celtics series, I thought that of all the Sixers defenders, Josh Richardson did the best job on Jason Tatum, which is saying something considering Matisse Thybulle is another really high-level defensive player. Richardson's offense isn't terrific, but he is a very high-level defender, and he can make some reads in a pick-and-roll situation that allow him to be certainly a good enough offensive player that his defensive level makes him a super high-level role player and someone that is a really nice partner with Luka Doncic in the backcourt. Next guy here is Tim Hardaway. Hardaway is a really good stationary shooter, was around the 40% mark from 3 last year, which is obviously the marking of a high-level 3-point shooter. Some of that might have been him benefiting off of the great shots that Luka can create for you, but he still knocked him down, and you can't take that away from him. He's also better on the defensive end than people give him credit for. He's not an impactful on-ball defender, and in team defense he does get lost at times, but he's good enough in both areas that he's not a complete liability on that end, and with his plus shooting, that certainly makes him a viable option to be in a starting and closing lineup for a good team. Dorian Finney Smith is the next guy here. If I were Rick Carlisle, I would probably play Dorian Finney Smith over Tim Hardaway because, well, he isn't quite the same level of shooter, about a 36% shooter instead of the 40% shooter that Hardaway is. Finney Smith can handle a lot of the same shooting load, and he's also a better player off the dribble. He's an athletic finisher, and he's really good in transition. The other area where Finney Smith is better than Tim Hardaway is that he is an absolute wing stopper on the defensive end of the floor. Can take on a lot of the more challenging big wing matchups that the NBA throws at you. Guys like LeBron James, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Jason Tatum. He's capable of guarding those caliber of players, and that makes him super valuable, especially slotting in between two players that can't necessarily guard at a high level in Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis. Finney Smith, if his three-point shooting were better, he'd be an absolute top-notch 3-and-D wing player, but even with it just being about average, he's still a good fifth starter on a good team. And I think that if I were Rick Carlisle, even once KP comes back, Finney Smith would be someone I would have in my starting lineup. I'd say that the optimal starting five for this Mavericks team is probably Luka, Richardson, and then it gets kind of tough. I'd say Dorian Finney-Smith, Kristaps Porzingis, and Dwight Powell. But you could make the debate that you should start Hardaway over Powell and have Porzingis play the five. I could go either way. But getting back to the players, Josh Green is the next guy here. I don't necessarily think that he's going to be a part of this wing rotation this year, considering that at the two guard positions, they are absolutely stacked, and at the forward spots, or I guess the small forward spot, since Josh Green is probably a bit too small to actually play the power forward, you already have Tim Hardaway and Dorian Finney-Smith, and I think that for this season at least, Westside Woundu is probably going to be a better player than Josh Green. But that's not to say that Green doesn't have good long-term potential. He's a pretty average three-point shooter at this point, and a lot of his shots come off of stationary looks. He's not a good shooter off of movement, but he doesn't necessarily need to be, considering the fact that the Mavericks have a guy like Luka who's dominant on the ball and is most likely going to be finding stationary shooters more frequently than he's going to be finding movement shooters. And on the defensive end, Green has very high potential. He plays with a high motor, does a nice job in team defense, and is a genuinely good player on the ball as well. He's not necessarily a high steals or blocks guy. He's not going to be a defensive playmaker, but he is a smart defender, and his shooting on offense should make him a viable rotational piece for many years to come. He doesn't have much off the dribble shot creation ability, and if he wants to get past just being like a solid wing off the bench, he's probably going to have to find that ability to attack closeouts and create some shots off the dribble. But generally, I think he's going to end up being a decent bench player, and with the 18th pick, you could do worse. Westside Woundu is the last player here, and I am a pretty big fan of his, like I said before. He's a strong on-the-ball player, both on the offensive end and the defensive end. Has enough burst to get around defensive players and utilize his athleticism to finish at the rim. He's not much of a shooter, only about 31% for his career, so that needs to improve in order for him to be a stronger offensive player. But he's a good on-ball defender, gets lost sometimes in team defense, but usually his athleticism allows him to recover at a high rate once he makes those mistakes. I'm a fan of his, and I think that he should be in the rotation for this team, at least in the early going. Finally, we'll move on to the big man position, where it has to start with Kristaps Porzingis. Porzingis is probably the best 3-and-D big man in the entire league. He also has some ability in post-up or spot-up or face-up situations on the offensive end of the floor, playing out of the post, but generally his best offensive talent is as a pick-and-pop big man. He also can roll to the rim, and he finishes at a high level, but where you really are utilizing Porzingis at his best is as a floor-spacing big who can run terrific pick-and-rolls with Luka Doncic or a Jalen Brunson as the pick-and-roll ball handler. On the defensive end, Porzingis isn't a superb defender just because he does not have much mobility. He can't guard much on the perimeter, but he is a high-level rim protector, led the league in block percentage the season prior to his ACL tear, so I guess that would have been 2017-18. He was number 1 in block percentage in the entire league, so he's a high-level rim protector, which makes him at least a good defensive player. He's not quite as impactful as he could be if we could see him switch out on the perimeter. If he could do that, and he'd be like an Anthony Davis, Giannis Antetokounmpo level defensive player. But just with the way that he is currently, he's a good rim protector who can do a lot of good things for you offensively as well. And that's a super valuable big man. Probably, depending on what position you consider him at, a top 6 or 8 big man at either the 4 or the 5. Dwight Powell's the next guy here. Powell is a pretty standard rim-running, rim-protecting big man. Does a nice job of blocking shots and is a high-level finisher at the rim. Does a nice job in the pick and roll. And with someone like Luka Doncic who can find him as a rim runner, that's certainly a nice role for him to have on this team. Maxi Klieba is maybe a bit of the opposite of Dwight Powell. He's much more of a perimeter big. He can guard multiple positions defensively, pretty much like 3 through 5. He's also a decent rim protector at blocking about posting about a 3% block rate, which is certainly good for someone who's playing on the perimeter for large portions of time. On the offensive end, he's also a very good floor spacer, shot it around 37% last year, and also has some stuff he can do off the dribble. He's a good passer for a big man, which is another asset that he has. Overall, just a really high-level option as a role player. He's on a great contract moving forward, and he's a perfect piece alongside Porzingis and Doncic, as he can take on some difficult matchups guarding on the perimeter and space the floor for them on the offensive end. Next guy here is Willie Cauley Stein. Cauley Stein is similar to Dwight Powell in that he is a good rim runner and a good shot blocker. Does he bring much else to the table? Not really. He's a better rebounder than Dwight Powell is, but he's also not as good of a defensive player, so you get a little bit and you lose a little bit when you make that substitution at the center spot. But Willie Cauley Stein's on a cheap contract, and he's a decent backup big man for this team. James Johnson is the next guy here. Johnson is a 3-and-D guy who is much more of the D than the 3, although we did see him actually shoot the 3 ball at a decent rate last year, around 36 or 37% if my memory serves me correctly. He's also very good on the defensive end, where he can take on multiple different matchups, guards multiple positions, and can also protect the rim pretty well for someone that's playing more of a power forward spot than a center spot. Not a bad pickup for the Mavericks in the DeLon Wright trade, and I think that he's certainly someone that could see some playoff minutes as a nice matchup for some of the bigger wings or even big men in the league, such as Anthony Davis. He's probably one of the better matchups that you could throw at AD in the NBA. Last guy here is Bobon Marianovich, and we all love Bobon. He's everybody's favorite player, but he's too much of a liability to really be a strong piece in an NBA rotation at this point. He just is too slow to really be impactful on that end, despite being 7'4" or whatever it is. He cannot protect the rim very well. Only blocks about 2%. Only posts about a 2% block rate, which is certainly not what you would expect from someone with his positional size. But he's really an effective offensive big man. Can score very well in the paint. Has developed a nice post game with a good hook shot, and he's also a plus rebounder, one of the best rebounders in the league. He's able to use his size to his advantage there and posted a rebounding rate around 30% last year, which is simply outstanding. But because of the defensive limitations, you don't really see Bobon play more than like 10 to 12 minutes per game. When he is in there, though, he's super fun to watch, and he's a great guy, a great character, super funny. Everybody loves Bobon, like I said before. In general, this Mavs team is good, but not great. I think some people have upgraded them and put them into the same tier with the Lakers and the Clippers and the Nuggets. And I'm not quite there yet on this team. I think that they could struggle, especially to open up the season with Kristaps Porzingis being injured. I think that that is a bigger deal than a lot of people are making it out to be, especially with a couple other injury concerns, like is Dwight Powell fully healthy coming off of his injury? You know, there's questions with this team in the front court. But they have Luka Doncic. Once Kristaps is healthy, they'll have a second star playing alongside him, and that alone is good enough to get you into the playoffs. I don't necessarily think that they're a lock to not be in the play-in tournament, and at this point, I think they're probably the 7th best team in the Western Conference, which would mean they're probably going to win somewhere between 38 and 42 games. So if I were to be making a prediction on their win-loss total, that's probably about where I would be. I get it. It's probably a lot lower than the general consensus is on this team, which might be a bit surprising because I like a lot of their players quite a bit. But I also don't know that they necessarily upgraded as much as a lot of people think that they did. And I think that a lot of the Western Conference around them made huge improvements. Teams like Phoenix, like Portland, like, Denver obviously has taken a huge jump. I think Utah is going to be better this season. So I just don't really see the Mavericks placing all that much higher than they did last year. I think they'll probably jump Houston and certainly Oklahoma City in the standings, but I also think they're probably going to get passed by teams like Portland and Phoenix. So the 7th seed is my prediction. I don't think they'll have any trouble making it out of the play-in game, but if you're the 7th seed or the 8th seed, that means you're playing someone like the Lakers, Clippers, or Nuggets in the first round, and I don't think the Mavericks could make it past any of those teams. So, predicting this season for the Mavs, I think Luka will make first-team All-NBA once again. They'll have a decent year, but it'll end in another first-round exit. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. I could also see it where Luka takes another jump and Kristaps Porzingis comes back and he's healthy, and this is a legit contender to win the Western Conference. So I'm sure we'll have some people that are more in that frame of mind than I am. Let me know in the comments. I think I've covered everything that I wanted to cover. So that's going to be it for me. Ladies and gentlemen, I will see you all again very soon.